One of the things about the election in 1800 was that it was very brutal, as I said. You had two individuals, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who had been very good friends, really had grown far apart at this point in time. And as a result, there were a lot of hard feelings. And one of the things that Jefferson discovered as he became president was that when you are in what we refer to as the loyal opposition, okay, we have that long standing concept in American government, is that the party who's not in power is still loyal to the nation, though opposed to the current party that is in power. When you're part of the loyal opposition, it is much, much easier to complain about what the president and his party is doing than it is to actually govern. A lot of presidents have gone in thinking one thing only to find out that reality isn't exactly what they had built up in their minds. And you're going to find with Thomas Jefferson that there was a good chunk of this, that he had gone in with a particular mindset to how the government should work, how the Constitution should work, and things like that. But he's going to find out that there are limitations based on circumstance. It's going to be a difficult moment of realization, but it's going to have to come nonetheless. It was on March 4th, 1801, that Thomas Jefferson was inaugurated president in the brand new capital of Washington, D.C. Adams was the first president to actually live in D.C., but you're going to have Jefferson now be inaugurated there. Now, like I said, this had been a long, difficult, drawn out battle royale as far as elections go. And when Thomas Jefferson gives his inaugural address, he one of the things he is most famous for in that address was the phrase where he said, "We are all Federalists, we are all Republicans." In this address, he declared that. And what that means is that Americans are a mixture of everything. That Americans are Americans first and their party second. Now, granted, we have had a number of politicians and individuals to this very day who they don't really care that much about the individual as long as they have the quote unquote correct letter after their name, be that an R or a D in today's world. But one of the things that he was talking about here was that the framers were very concerned with the concept of faction, and you can translate that into party if you like. But essentially, what we're looking at is the fact that Jefferson felt one should put nation above party. Now, whether or not you see this as hypocritical after all the fighting to get to the presidency, or whether you see this as a moment of realization, I leave that up to you, as I do with so many things. One of the other things that he tried to pledge was honest friendship with all nations and entangling alliances with none. And you look at that, and it seems very, very similar to the fact that both Washington and Adams fought for a policy of neutrality. Honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none, basically saying, look, we're not going to pick sides. We're going to remain neutral. We want to be friends with everybody. There had been a great deal of complaint over the fact that the Federalists had not declared war on France. And now here we are. Well, we're going to just be friends with everybody and not get involved. It seems awfully similar. So already in his inaugural address, Jefferson is already starting to see that the requirements of the presidency oftentimes are going to outweigh the rhetoric of the campaign trail. And he's going to find this with a lot more aspects of his presidency as we move forward. Now, as far as his presidency goes, okay, Jefferson was, for lack of a better term, simple and frugal. Okay, we didn't have the formal state dinners that had been, there for the Adams and Washington administration. Instead, he had, sort of informal suppers. Okay, you did not get your seat based on rank during these dinners. Okay, he was unconventional. He had a tendency to dress kind of sloppily. Went around in, like house shoes, slippers, and things like that. He would sometimes be the one who actually answered the door at the White House. This was a point in time where, quite literally, anyone could go up, knock on the door of the White House, and try to get an audience with the president. I know, granted, in the world we live in today, the concept of someone walking up to the door of the White House and knocking seems quite alien, but it was available at that time. So he set the precedent of changing the way the formal state dinners were. They were now informal suppers. He had a tendency to, kind of dress sloppily, as I said. And one of the big things he did, he was not a public speaker. He did not feel that that was one of his strengths. And so as a result, he started the precedent of sending messages to Congress to be read by a clerk. Now, we think about the State of the Union address each year, that this is a big production, that the president goes, a lot of people will watch it and things like that, because that's where the president lays out his legislative agenda. Well, Thomas Jefferson looked at what the Constitution said. It says that from time to time the president shall report to the Congress on the State of the Union, and he did so. He wrote up a report, sent it to Congress, and a clerk read it into the record there. So he was a president that wasn't big on public speaking, and I know we look at the presidency of today, and a president or a presidential candidate has to at least be comfortable going out speaking in public. We've had some presidents that are fantastic when it comes to public speaking. Others, not so much. It just depends. But in this case, we did have the president to decide that it wasn't necessary to go speak before Congress if he could just send a written version. For lack of a better term, he decided to send it by text rather than make a phone call. Now, in all honesty, there were basically two Thomas Jeffersons, okay? You had the scholarly, private citizen who liked to discuss philosophy and philosophized in his study. This is the Jefferson that we tend to think of. This is the one who wanted us as an agrarian nation where the farmers worked their fields in the day and then debated politics in the evenings, things like that. But there was also the harassed public official. There was the president, Thomas Jefferson, the one who discovered that theories in books aren't always the same thing in practical reality. There are a number of people who, through the course of time, the phrase has been that they are book smart, meaning that they may have a great deal of knowledge, but not a lot of understanding. And Jefferson was finding out that while he had gone through and he had really read a great deal, this was a very intelligent individual. He found out that the theory and the practice didn't always work out. I've told you guys before, I was a political science major. My major was basically the study of how government operates. Well, that's the theory aspect of government. The practical reality is the study of politics, how it actually operates. And one thing that politicians have a tendency to find is what they plan out and what actually works in the real world are not always the same thing. Thomas Jefferson was one of these presidents who went into the office with a lot of ideas as to how things should work and then discovered that reality is a little bit different than theory. And he had to come to terms with that and figure out how he was going to use that knowledge to continue on in his presidency. Now, at this time, we also did have, to a lesser extent, it wasn't really full blown yet, we had what was called the spoils system. And that comes from the phrase, to the victor goes the spoils. What often happened, and this really became rampant during the Andrew Jackson administration, we'll talk about later, was that a new political party came in and they fired all the old people from the quote-unquote wrong political party and put their own people in place. And there were a lot of people who thought this was going to happen right here, that Jefferson would come through, he would fire every Federalist in government that he possibly could and replace them with his own people. Now, he did dismiss some federal officials, okay, but not a ton. He just dismissed a handful of people, in all honesty. And this annoyed his own party. There were people from within his own party that wanted those jobs or wanted those seats, and they complained very vocally to Jefferson that what he needed to do was go through and fire everybody. The problem with a spoils system like that is you end up with people who are completely incompetent doing various jobs. Or even worse, they're incompetent and corrupt. So in this case, Jefferson didn't go through and fire every Federalist that was possible. He did let some go, yes, but not the way his party wanted, and there were a number of people who were unhappy with that within his own party. Jefferson really had to rely on his charm. His party was very disunited. There is always that issue in every political party, in every race from the beginning of our political system through to this very day. You have, for example, right now we have two political parties that predominate. We have the Republicans and the Democrats. But to say that each one is monolithic and that they all agree, every single member of the Republican or the Democrat Party all agree 100% on every single issue would be disingenuous. It would not be true. Same thing was going on here. Within his own party, Jefferson was facing difficulties. Jefferson was facing those who were unhappy with what he had done and the way he was governing. He was starting to find out that campaigning and governing are two vastly different things. He not only had to deal with the fact that the Federalists weren't happy with him, but he had to deal with the problems within his own party. He had to deal with his own people being unhappy with him. And this is going to be a hallmark of his presidency, that he's going to have to really fight and struggle to make sure that he gets done those things that he saw as being the most important.